Okay.
Oops. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be able to introduce you to Rob Seyffert, who I met through my neighbor Megan. Rob is an adjunct professor at the College of Mount St. Vincent in the art department. I recently met several of his colleagues, and one of them told me that Rob is the hands-down favorite among students. He's not only an artist and a teacher, he's a curator and a writer. Rob is with us tonight to discuss his experiences painting the East River bridges. We will see how Rob captures the view of the East River and its historic crossings in his time capsule paintings just before the city awakes. Rob has exhibited extensively, including most recently an exhibition of his bridges in 2021 at the National Arts Club in Manhattan. As you may remember from the course description, he has pieces in several museums, including the National Portrait Gallery and many private collections. Painting is in Rob's blood, as several of his family members are also painters. If you haven't already looked at his website, robseyffert.com, it's definitely worth a look, and you can also check out his Instagram, Robert Seyffert. I'll put those info into the chat for you. Okay, Rob, up to you. Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pat.
And if everybody could mute for now. If you have a question, would you please raise your hand using the reaction thing, the little hand button? I think I just did it. No, I didn't. But if you would raise your hand, and if you do, Rob will allow us to ask questions during his presentation. Or if you want, you can put it in the chat and I'll watch for it. Okay.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Robin, and thank you, Pat, for helping and setting this up. And I'm so happy to be here to be able to talk with you about this experience I had, because it was a very exciting experience for me in the context of all the type of work and artwork that I do, to take on something that would be like an actual project. I mean, generally, artists don't necessarily often work with, sometimes they work with projects, but working with a project means having an idea from the beginning. And a lot of artists like to wing it and continue doing, as you know, many artists do repetitive kind of paintings. You know, they get into one idea and they repeat themselves, which is wonderful if they have a good development in what they're doing. Sometimes it has to do with marketing and a gallery wanting you to do the same sort of thing over and over. But the idea of coming up with an idea ahead of time is interesting in painting, because as a relatively traditional painter that I am, I like to, as a painter, I like to be able to kind of know the places I go and get a good idea of what I'm doing outside, and I never really would have thought that I would actually paint something almost in the dark, and it was a really kind of a wonderful idea, and it developed as after the idea. So it's a little bit after the fact, and that the idea developed. So as you come up with the idea, and then you start doing it, and then you realize where it takes you, which is a good way to explain it. So I'm now going to share my screen, and okay. Right.
I wonder if
And
it's office. Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it? Or a studio at home.
so I think I'm going to read.
I wanted to get a picture of the.
Pardon me. Great. So yes, I'm just to let you know, location wise, I'm in my studio. I'm in Spanish Harlem, on the 5th floor of a walk-up building where I've turned my 2-bedroom apartment into my studio. So the entire apartment is my studio. This is the largest room in the whole place, and that's where you see my easel right behind me, a large oil painting that I'm working on, a cityscape, and it's wonderful. I'm at the top floor. I can look, actually, wonderfully, I can look out at the East River, right at these 2 windows here, right at the corner of 119th and Pleasant Avenue, right near the FDR Drive. And so I look at the river all the time, and I live, when I'm in the studio, I'm always looking at it. But I'm going to read this because it's an essay I wrote for the show. So, at dawn, we anticipate the promise of a new day through subtle, cool light as our horizon increasingly illuminates. Our observation is altered as lights pierce the darkness, as the yellow cast spreads out across the cityscape. Our daily vantage points have been altered in the pandemic, often through the constraints of our living spaces and lockdown. The small space challenge, along with the same space confines for so many, has been a painful contrast to our earlier unconstrained perspective. Yet the vibrancy and expanse of New York City almost magically revealed itself, even from small spaces with limited views. And now the city is reawakening, collectively calibrating with a new recognition of our fragility and new appreciations. Very intentionally on small canvases, I seek to convey the vibrancy of the expanse of the city that can be revealed from us being something small. Breathing in the fresh air, the pure joy of en plein air painting has never been more fortifying and more of a homage to my beloved city. Well, I hate the last sentence in a sense because it's not my beloved city, it's everybody's beloved city. So I have no ownership on it. But I have been a New York artist. I came to Parsons to go to graduate school here, and then pretty much have been the largest part of my life here in New York City as an artist, and involved with the art scene and various levels and teaching. So a lot of what began and what kind of captivated me with this thought of doing paintings of dawn. So you start with that idea, the description of the concept of dawn, and that idea. Let me see if I can get a little bit bigger screen here. Bear with me 1 second here. Okay. That idea of finding this idea of how would I paint in the dark, for instance. So there were many challenges with this idea, but I knew that I would just be beginning something in the dark, but I had to get to a location. As a location artist, I use and we'll see a little bit more of it later, I use a French easel, or we call it a French easel. It's really an easel that you set up with your paints, and you actively paint something that you see in front of you perceptually while you're there. And so much a part of the experience is actually doing the painting on the location. It's not that you're trying to copy something, it's that you're having the actual experience. And then that experience becomes a piece of time and a place and a color and a sense of light and a sense of place. I think it's a wonderful term, a sense of place. And so that idea of projecting that into a work of art, I always believe there's a great tradition of people hanging paintings in their homes. And hopefully, in my case, we're getting that into museums and galleries and things like that. But that idea of having something personal from my own experience in that moment. So when I decided to do this, I had to decide, well, I'm going to drive my car and I'm going to take my materials in the car and find a location where you can imagine how difficult that is in New York City. Finding a place where I can leave my car someplace nearby for 3 hours. That's the first challenge, but an interesting one for me, because I kind of know New York City parking, and I kind of know what you have to do and the challenge of that. So I would go downtown. I drove down the East River, and in this particular location, we're going to see right here, we have a neighborhood at the bottom of Manhattan. Of course, we'll go back and look at all of Manhattan in a minute, but here we have this twin bridges. It's called two bridges. It's the two bridges coming. They are narrower, closer in Brooklyn as they sweep across into Manhattan. They widen out into that actual neighborhood that's called Two Bridges neighborhood. And the two bridges on the left at the bottom is the Brooklyn Bridge. On the right at the bottom is the Manhattan Bridge. Two very different bridges, two bridges that were built at different times. Brooklyn Bridge being the first bridge built to Manhattan Island from Brooklyn, when Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan were really very, very similar. And later the other bridge was built. But you see the red dot, that red dot is actually this location right here. And so we're looking across the river right before the sun kind of peaks up over the horizon. And we're looking, when you think of Manhattan, you're actually looking at an island that actually faces sort of southwest to northeast slightly. So all the people in Manhattan think when they look out their northern windows, they have north light. Well, they actually have north, but slightly east light. But in most cases, and likewise the people who face south, who want all the warm, sunny weather, are actually looking in the opposite of that. So as I decided that I was going to be painting looking east to see the sunrise, I decided, well, I'm just going to have to be along the East River. So I looked at the maps and I looked at where I might be able to go. I looked at the locations of the bridges, and the bridges seem to become the focal point of these paintings because they're really about the idea of a thing in the painting, a thing that has to do with travel, that has to do with history, that has to do with so many elements in our thoughts and ideas and visually. And so as you look here, it's pretty complicated. It's kind of interesting to look how the FDR Drive from the top right part sweeps all the way down along the river, all the way down to Wall Street in the financial district. And down near that little red dot is South Street. And a little bit further south of the Brooklyn Bridge is what we call the South Street Seaport and South Street, which is the most historic part of New York in many ways, right down where the Dutch first settled at the bottom. And so you can see in the bottom left where the South Street Seaport is, and then you can see kind of get an idea of these sweeping areas. This is a wonderful map that was a three-dimensional map created, and it's a great chance to show you things. So when I went to the first location, it was this location, and this location is actually a public music venue and a public pier that sticks out right just a little bit north of Manhattan Bridge. And you look out at the skyline of Brooklyn with the Brooklyn Power Plant, and then you're looking up all the way up into the Bronx. And getting there is part of my experience. Is not just that I'm trying to do the painting of the bridge or a painting of a location. It's the experience that I have, which motivates me, and it's exciting. So the first few days I went there, of course, everybody's still wearing their masks. The fishermen were all there. These wonderful gentlemen who were all basically pushing for position to get the right position because the striped bass were running. And so they were all very diligently making an effort to catch some striped bass. And of course, that was kind of exciting because it's kind of fun to watch that. I wondered if I would want to include them in my painting, but many of them did catch a bunch of striped bass, and I was able to photograph them here. But this is the modern parquet stone floor that's been put in this very contemporary location. So if we look where the red dot is, that's actually the pier that's right there. And to the left is a location that I then decided I would spend a good bit of time. So many of these paintings are done with the X there. And here I am painting the first painting, which is on just south of the Manhattan Bridge. And you can kind of get a little idea of my working habits and the way that I work. Somewhere to the left, back in amongst all the trees and the buildings, is my car. So I would drive my car down in the darkness, and people racing on FDR Drive to get to work at 6 a.m. Or 5:30 a.m. or something like that. And I'd try to find a place where I could actually leave the car for 3 hours. So I had to check all the signs, and I got pretty good at it. And then I would go over and wander around and then decide what location I would work. And luckily this location all along here is actually now a pretty big public park. So it's actually fairly easy to find a location to work. And you can kind of get a little bit of an idea of how I'm working. I'm basically using a palette with oil paints. And my easel, I put a white canvas in most cases. Sometimes I use a colored canvas, but in this case, a white canvas. And I basically paint it almost, I would say, like an abstract painter would. I mean, I use a lot of paint, put out a lot of paint. I drop a few drops of turpentine into each color and get it so it's fairly loose. And then I just draw with the paint. I draw with the paint back and forth, dark and light, to get the drawing of the location of where I want to see things. So this becomes like what I would consider to be an underpainting, which is then finished more in the studio. So my first strike at the painting is about 3 hours, and I'll get as much done. Now, the interesting thing in this 3 hours period is that if I start painting in the dark, things change very quickly. And I may look at the sky and say the sky looks purple, but then a half an hour later, the sky starts to look green. And then half an hour later, the sky starts to look black, blue. And then a little bit later, it changes. So all of the relationships of the dark colors, this is kind of an antithesis and very different from the Impressionist painters who painted light. They painted trees. They made the shadows purple. They realized how they could use pointillism and bits of color to illuminate things and make them vibrant. I'm working very differently. I'm working with very flat colors without a lot of small brush strokes, but trying to really locate the colors of the darks in this case. And this became a challenging thing for me to understand how to use dark and how to use dark to create light. And so one of the ideas, I think, and the most interesting thing that's inspirational in Sense of the Bridges is their huge size, their scope, their size. So this is an idea of the work, how I work with my colors. So I use as few colors as I need to, but so basically there I'm using 9 or 10 colors. So I start with a very light cadmium, lemon cadmium. So it's a very cool yellow. So it's a cool yellow that's very necessary when you want to paint things that are bright and light, but that are not yellow and orangey. And and those of you that know the color spectrum know that how the colors move through the whole field. They start in cool and warm. And cool and warm is a term that we use often. I have another yellow that's a little warmer, more orangey. Then I use a cadmium red light, which is an orangey kind of a red. Then I use burnt umber, which is a very good color for mixing with other colors, but darks, because it dries matte. And when you mix it with black, when you mix it with dark blue, it gives you a kind of a matte sheen on the painting so that it's not very, very shiny. Then I use an alizarin crimson, which is like a purple color that's very intense and transparent. I use a cerulean blue, which is like almost like a turquoise direction blue. And then I use an ultramarine blue, sometimes a cobalt blue, but an ultramarine blue, which is really very much like the North Atlantic color blue. Then I use a black sometimes, and then I use a viridian green. And as I'm working on a paper palette, which I dispose of. Sadly, one of the toughest things in art is that you try really hard to be environmentally conscious of the things. But I'm using a solvent, so that I'm not great at that. But I don't like acrylics. I really like oil paintings. They give you a kind of a depth and a way of working, which I particularly like. So you can kind of see here a little close-up of that particular painting, what was painted in about 2 hours. And a lot of drawing at the beginning, a lot of adjusting, and then eventually the big pieces of color sort of located in and placed in. So this is the final painting after a lot of work on it and a lot of work done in the studio. So you can kind of see how something simple and just painted changes when I get in the studio and I look at the colors and I think of my photos. Yes, I use photos. I use my it's wonderful having an iPhone, because I just take a lot of pictures while I'm painting, and then I'll use them for reference. And then the reference that I use them for are to add more elements to the painting that are quote unquote realistic, so a lot of those things that are realistic obviously would be the lights that are shining in the distance, the lights that illuminate. So you can see before there's nothing is indicated. Those are the things that are added towards the end of the painting. But the water is important. That's essential. Water is one of the most absolutely confoundingly complicated things to paint, because it actually is a system. There's an actual system to painting water, that you have waves, and the waves reflect the light. And they also are transparent so that you can see through them. So all the time that you're looking at water, you're looking into the water that's facing you. You're looking at a reflection of the water on top of the wave. And so those two things, the top of the wave reflection and the into the color of the water from the water that's facing you, change the color and the style of the, in a sense, the style of how you make the marks. And so I just adore, and I love to look at shimmering water and try to capture the sense of its movement, try to capture the sense of its catching light, catching the reflected light, as well as catching the past light. And I think that the lights of the background is so amazing, because when I would get to anywhere in the dark, all of the lights were on. All of those lights were on the bridge. All the lights in the distant shoreline were on. But if we go backwards and see in this painting here, excuse me, this photo here, this is just after it gets light enough so that all of the lighting is turned off. So it's amazing how when you arrive in the dark, everything's illuminated, everything is bright, everything has these lights. And then within an hour, within that X hour, everything goes away. Everything goes away. All the lights along the piers, lights in the windows, not necessarily. In some cases, they continue. But you can see here that it's still dark enough so that all the lights are illuminated in all the different buildings. That became an element to these paintings that really excited me. I really enjoyed watching the lights illuminate. And I watched, when I arrived, they were illuminated, and then I watched them go. And I kind of noted which went when, and luckily was able to capture them with my photos. So here, the sun is finally peaked up. So every time I went out to paint, it was a different style weather pattern. And know a lot of artists who have studied the weather. They basically, the Constable, one of the greatest ones, you could actually look at his clouds and realize the type of weather, whether you were in a high or low, the direction of the wind, all of these things. Well, the same thing happened with me, that every time I went out along the river, there was something different. The color was different, but also the sense of the feeling of the air, the sense of the depth, whether or not there was any mist, whether or not there was any mist is a great thing. It develops a sense of space, because you see the more distant things are, the more they disappear. Whereas this is a fairly clear time early in the morning, even though there are clouds way in the distance that the sun is peeking through. So when the sun peeks through those clouds, that's when I knew I had to stop, because dawn was basically coming to an end. So in this particular painting, also from a similar location, I basically used a canvas that I had in the studio that something else had been painted on, but I kind of like the idea of having an under painting, in a sense. It was kind of a abstract feeling of painting on top of something that had paint already on it. But I like the idea of that kind of expressive nature of that. And what interested me more than anything in this particular painting in this time was the clouds. The clouds really did set off a sense of a color, purples, blues, the oranges of the clouds hitting the light from the sun, a little bit of sun, and then the greenish sky. And same with the water, that I really tried to get a sense of that reflection of the lights from the Manhattan Bridge reflecting on the water and shining, sprinkling in an animated kind of a sense. And so very much, these paintings are very much about color, but they're also about drawing. They're also about accuracy, but there's a lot of artistic license I take with them. This isn't exactly the way you would have seen this in a photograph, or even if you were standing there. I think I probably brought the right side of the bridge a little further to the left to include it in the painting more. And I think probably some of the buildings I may have changed a little bit to get their shape right. And so you can kind of see that color, that idea of the color that you get from different times that I'm there. So each time I went down to this Two Bridge area, things were a little bit different each morning that I went down. And some days the clouds are much higher in the sky. Some days the clouds are much lower. There's a lot more atmosphere. And so depending on the time of day, obviously I'm in the morning, but looking at the time, like within an hour, everything would change. And you can kind of see, the moments where something would be spectacularly beautiful to me in a photographic sense. I wouldn't have actually painted this. It would have been a little bit too, maybe a little too sentimental or too specific, even though I love that way that cloud creeps across the sun as it's coming up. But the idea of being in a time and a place, so exciting to be with the sun there. So all this area down here, I continued to work in, and I continued to sort of explore that area before I started to move to another part of the city. But this part of the city really, when the sun came up, all kinds of discoveries were to be made. Now, I did discover that we actually have a sand beach in Manhattan. And the sand beach is basically right where you see the X there, because the water from the river, from the East River, moves and turns a corner there. And where that water turns the corner, where that X is, that's where the sand has built up. And that's because of the currents. And so I thought, well, boy, it would be wonderful if the Department of Parks decides to make that a public sand beach for Manhattan. That would be something else. In an awful way, I also got to see all the pollution, got to see all the remnants of things, cables and things like that, things that were just abandoned from the old days and the ships and things. But to see in the great distance, the Williamsburg Bridge, you can see right there. The Williamsburg Bridge is one I did not paint, and for no other reason than I just didn't get to it. I found myself in that 1 month period painting in other locations. And I think maybe would like to get to the Williamsburg Bridge, but I found that the Williamsburg Bridge. So here you see, it's wonderful to see this wonderful thing that's brought up. And I definitely don't want to have this too much turned into photos of a beauty of New York, which I could easily do. But it was a wonderful thing to see all the seagulls here and the unfortunate Excel building, that huge building that's right next to the Williamsburg Bridge. But this is a wonderful panoramic, so you can kind of see the feeling of the two bridges here, because I'm standing underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, and obviously they're doing work on it. There's a large barge there, but then you can see the Williamsburg Bridge to the left, and then the Manhattan Bridge to the left, and then further way off in the distance, right to the left of the sun, you see the top of the Williamsburg Bridge. So the right, you don't really see a bridge, but you're looking right out to the Brooklyn Naval Yards. And this is done with a panoramic, so you kind of see, but it's a lovely sense. So this really shows you a little bit about the action of water and how water does reflect light. So you're looking into the dark of the water that's actually is dark. When you look into it, see the bottom of the, but then it reflects the color of the sky on the top of each of the waves. And then it has a very sort of moderated swoop that goes back to the next wave and then back to the next wave, so that you understand the pattern in a sense of how things move along in a parallel way. So this is another painting I did of the Williamsburg Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, sorry. And I got very interested in the base of it. The base is huge stone base, and painting that and seeing it abstractly, but also very much interested in the color that I'm seeing in the distance in the sky, the orange against the colors of the skies. But the marks that are made, you can kind of follow a pattern to a certain degree. And you can see that orange picked up in one of my photos. So that's actually the music venue that's there, the park that's been built out onto the river that we saw right in the beginning of this presentation. And so that's where I started with all the paintings. You can kind of see behind it to the left the Williamsburg Bridge. Now I did varying size paintings. So I did some very large and some very small. And the larger ones, like the first one that we saw, were the ones that took the most time. But but became to a certain degree the most studio-like. In other words, I would work on them for several hours outside, and then I would bring them into the studio. But the thing that I loved about this one particularly was that as I was painting it, there was a planet in the middle of the left-hand side, and I just became fascinated. Could I actually put a planet in this painting to sort of contrast this idea of the lights on the bridge, which I did. So you see it, a little tiny dot right in the middle here. Well, that's actually Uranus. That's the planet Uranus. And I found that out later by actually going and looking at the sky chart and finding out exactly at that time of day what it would be. It was either going to be Venus or Uranus, and I found out that it was Uranus at that time. And I over a period of time working on it in the studio, kept that in my painting. Well, that just an element of the closeness of something so big and massive and industrial that humans made with this planet in the distance became an element that I kind of enjoyed in the painting. But I think also that my interest in color is seen in this painting. My interest in the color that you see at dawn, even though the sun is just starting to come up, there's still a remarkable amount of color, and depending on the weather and the type of weather that you have. So Pat, I just wanted to ask how we're doing on time. I've just been talking and I'm curious.
You're on mute, Pat, but it's like 20.
I was on mute. It's 6:30.
Okay, good. So I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to continue. And I do want to just tell you a couple of things about this particular painting, though, that interested me. That I had experiences in going and doing these works that were so human and interesting to me, like discovering that whole neighborhood, that whole area. I want to go back to the map and just talk about it a little bit. That the park that they built in this whole area, largely that whole part of Twin Bridges, Two Bridges neighborhood there is right on the border of the eastern part of Chinatown. And they built a whole recreational area there so that people can work out. And one of the great joys was to watch about 20 people doing Tai Chi early in the morning, 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And then often they would come over and look at what I was painting. This is kind of an experience that I have often. I always wear headphones when I'm working, and you can kind of see in this photo here that I'm wearing my headphones, and I only do that because I want to have the opportunity. I want to have the possibility of not having to speak to anybody if they're bothering me. But if somebody really takes an interest in what I'm doing, I'm more than happy to speak to them, because I'm there in a wonderful public place, and it's important for me to kind of participate in a sense with the community. And I think that I particularly like that aspect of doing these paintings of relatively popular subjects. I mean, you all know how many times you've seen this bridge in the background of movies, in the background of advertisements. If you follow the foot of this bridge as it hits Manhattan, right there is a street, and that street is often used for filmmaking and often used for different types of promotions. Now, of course, the Brooklyn Bridge is the most famous. So we'll certainly agree that the Brooklyn Bridge is the one that has been sold a million times. But both of these bridges, I think that the Manhattan and the Williamsburg Bridge would probably be, in their time, the most historic use of welding and steel and metal than anything else in the United States, probably than many other paintings. I don't know. I'm only guessing the Williamsburg Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge are probably from 1910, 1920, probably from the time when the skyscrapers were first being built, and the metal welders were starting to really put So you look at the construction and you look at how the steel is put in. This is, of course, for the FDR, but using riveting and using welding, and you just have to use your imagination to the manufacturing of these particular things. And then how the automobile played a big role in starting to come back and forth and traversing into Manhattan. I think that the feeling of the bridges, that one of the interesting feelings that I have when I've often was painting these is I'd get under this bridge and there'd be nobody around, and they were almost ominous, almost like a scary sci-fi feel to them, like this huge, vast darkness that something could come out of. And that's a wonderful kind of a sensation that I always often like getting when I'm near something that's borderline dangerous. And sometimes in the early mornings, I felt quite alone in some of these areas because there was really nobody around. And I definitely paid attention to that. I definitely, as I stood there, always kept an eye on things around me. I always looked over my shoulder, not in the most paranoid way, I would say, but just in a way to be responsible for myself and make sure that I was safe. But I never had a problem. The only problem I had a couple of times were sadly people that were not well off in their minds, and they just came over and they were very relatively harmless, and that really wasn't really a problem for me. But I never had anybody really that I felt would harm me, so that was kind of a good thing. And I do look at these and I do think and imagine what it must have been like. I often think what it must have been like to build them, I think. But and of course, when I look at this and you see the curve in there, you can imagine when I'm doing the painting, I'm actually taking elements and taking parts of this and I'm moving them around, just the way I'm moving my screen around. I can find, when I can basically compose the painting, I want your eye to move around the painting in a good way. I want the eye to move around so that there's a sense of balance. And I think of Renaissance painting and you think of the golden mean, that concept of 1/3, 2/3. If you're looking at completely across the horizontal aspect of a painting, that in Renaissance that they decided that the golden mean should be that line that goes up and down, dividing 1/3 and 2/3 of the horizontal. And that concept stands true. That when you like to see things, you like to see things, and it's kind of pleasing to your eye not to move around and move off. Your eye likes to move around the picture. So I moved along the East River, and I just want to show the painting to you first, and then we'll look at its development. This is the amazing Queensboro Bridge, the Ed Koch, we call it now, to our great, wonderful mayor, Ed Koch. But the Queensboro Bridge, which has so many spans, it's amazing that even though I always knew that it had a few spans, I never realized how many it actually has. And so it's a 5-span bridge that goes across, and it sets itself down. Basically, if we look at the map, here I am painting, but if you look in the actual background, you'll see the bridge, and then you see the island. It's there, the Roosevelt Island. So it's that idea. I'm getting ahead of myself here. That idea that the span goes across and sets itself. So when I was painting early morning, basically while I was painting, there's a lot of traffic next to me because I was right next to the FDR. But that the sky was this sort of dark and ominous sky. And then as it became light, that orange appeared in the bottom left. And that became a note of color that really was exciting to a very dominantly cool kind of purple and green color of the river, and the reflection of the warm dark. Darks have colors. Darks have a lot of colors. They're warm or cool, essentially. But they also have bits of color in them. They can become green, or they can become purple. They can become very blue, and so those colors are the things that I like to see. And it's the dark elements that are placed in the right locations so that your eye moves around and goes through them to create a sense of space, and then rests in other places, then comes back around, so that you almost feel, I think, when you look at a painting, that your eye is moving throughout the space of the painting. And I think good painting always has your eye move around so that you don't suddenly get your eye moving completely off. Things are placed in the right location, so there's a sense of balance. And I think setting this up, it was a great location. I mean, I find a place where I'm going to work, and then put on my headphones, and then I kind of lose myself for a few hours in an action that really isn't very thought out. It's just like something I've done all my life. So I kind of know where the colors are on my palette, and I work fairly quickly. And then I try to assess the colors that I'm seeing and try to block them in as quickly as possible. So a painting which from the right before that I wasn't quite as successful and never really finished was when I started of the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, as you walk along the promenade and you see the Brooklyn Bridge, it basically is background by all of the financial districts. So you never actually see the bridge poking itself. So it gets disappeared in a sense, camouflaged by the buildings behind it. But you can see all of the downtown early morning, just as the sun is starting to come up, the bridge against the background, and seeing that part of Wall Street. And my effort, which I didn't complete in one sitting, was to I wanted to move the bridge out a little bit. So I made that decision that I would actually move it out and have it not be in blocking by the back part of Wall Street. And it's a painting which I still today haven't quite finished, but I'm still working on it. But I love that abstractness of the simplicity of the buildings against the water, and the idea of the water reflects. This horizontal line of the water is, to me, kind of balanced by the horizontal line of the bridge itself. And the bridge doesn't go straight across. It kind of goes a little higher on the left, a little lower on the right, but that movement of the bridge going across. And that, of course, is the most historic and famous scene, in a sense, that downtown part, looking down at the financial district. When you come down the FDR, you see the financial district looming up with the Woolworth building and the city municipal building, and the other buildings that are downtown are really so interestingly historic about Manhattan. And it becomes a moving thing, but of course the bridge is the most famous. And back, I'm just jumping back to the idea of the trolley car going over to the Roosevelt Island on the Queensboro Bridge right next to it. And that trolley starts very early in the morning. I mean, it actually goes, I think it stops. I can't remember what time it stops and starts. But if anybody hasn't done that, you really should. That's one of the most interesting things, to take that over from 59th Street and take it over to the island and walk around and see the image. I think looking back at Manhattan from Queens and from Brooklyn is the most exciting thing. This is also a wonderful bridge to walk across. It's a long walk. It's probably a little bit longer walk than walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. I'm not sure which one would be longer, but it's actually really wonderful views. And you actually walk over Roosevelt Island and look down and see all the construction in the building in Roosevelt Island itself. So here I am painting on the other side, and I'm moving north. So I'm just going to go ahead and just show you where the red dot is here. So I'm heading north along the East River to this location, and there's the island, and there's the Queensboro Bridge spanning across. And then this is the actual, to the right of the red dot is the actual road that you can drive from I can't remember if that's Brooklyn or Queens. I think that's Queens. You can drive across that bridge to drive out to Roosevelt Island. And so this location, to find a location early in the morning was another great one, because I was able to to very easily, well, not so easily park the car, but then walk over and set myself up. And here I am, just basically right before I'm starting to paint. But I have an actual light, which I'm able to use to set up a little bit. Then within 2 or 3 minutes of this photograph being taken, that light goes out and I'm almost in darkness painting. And then the starts to illuminate. So I have about, I would say in the most general sense, a window of about maybe an hour and a half where I can truly see things the way they're going to be in the painting. And before that hour and a half, I kind of have to guess, and at a 2.5 or 3 hour period, things are changing quite a bit. So in a sense here, you still have the illuminated lights from the darkness of the night that are on everywhere. But you're starting to see the color of the sky. And so I look at that color of that sky and I say, well, you know, definitely it's lighter and brighter to the left and darker to the right. These are things I think about value. And then I also think about the actual color note of the sky, which is very ultramarine. And I look at the color of the river and I kind of seen that with quite a lot of a dark black, green and purple in that river. So these are, of course, associations that I make. I do have to show everybody my favorite art students league bag that my uncle gave me. And that was his when he taught at the Art Students League. But I love the Queensboro Bridge. I think it's one of the most interesting bridges in the city. The way it spans across and the way that it basically traverses such a large area and goes well into Queens as rather than just dumping out. So you can kind of see here how far the bridge goes into Queens before you're able to get off of the bridge. In Manhattan, it comes to an end fairly soon, but in Queens, it goes quite a ways into Queens where the entrance and exit is for the automobiles. This pretty much became the image that I liked the most, in terms of the one which I wanted to use to finish the painting. And you can kind of see again the colors that I've used, the same colors from I showed you, and you can kind of get an idea of how I'm starting to block in the water. In this particular painting, I used an orange background, and the orange really is lovely the way it comes through with blue. Blue and orange are opposite colors, so they really affect each other in a good way to have little bits of them come through because your eyes kind of like to see opposite colors. And so the sense of the quick placement of the water, the location of the waves, which way they're moving, and you can really see everything I'm saying about the waves here. What do the waves do? The wave action. They basically show you the front of the wave, the top of the wave, and then behind the wave. Between the waves becomes the area that actually reflects the light from above. So in this particular case, all of that orange is being reflected from above, and the front of the wave is the actual color of the water. And then the top of the wave is reflecting the sky, just small amounts of, and almost you can divide into planes, like flat planes, if you can imagine moving flat planes along a wave and understanding the action that they take. And it's something I've studied and learned all of my life as a painter of water. And then you can see how relatively quickly, I think I'm probably very close to stopping. I think I came back to this one a second time to work on it more, but you can kind of see how quickly I'm blocking in the basic colors that I see, the most solid sort of understood things that I'm looking at, and seeing the shapes. You know, I'm looking at the shape of the actual bridge rather than certainly not putting in any detail at all at this stage of the painting, but just looking at generally where I'm going to be placing things and seeing the green that's in the trees, and also the sense of violet and green colors that are in the shadows of the buildings. And then probably relatively soon after this. You can kind of get an idea of how I work here. I basically take two cups that are taken off of a soda can, and I have in one of them, I'm using a solvent, like a mineral spirits, and the other I'm using turpentine. And the turpentine, I use this very small amount of the turpentine to mix in the paint to make it loose. And then the solvent I use to clean my brush or several brushes. And so I'm basically constantly going back and forth, cleaning the brushes, cleaning a brush or two brushes, and then scraping off the palette, and then doing a bunch of paint and keeping it fairly loose and fresh so that I can paint it out. Then you can kind of see using the tape. You have to have a lot of materials when you're working outside, because depending on the circumstances, in plein air painting, you can have all kinds of wind circumstances, you can have rain, you can have all kinds of the elements, dealing with the elements. It's kind of a fun thing, dealing with the elements in painting. That's actually something that I quite enjoy, because you're outdoors. So if somebody likes to do sports outdoors, skiing, and I like to do painting. So this is the second time when I came back to the painting. This is how abstract the painting is right in the early stage, relatively early stages. So you can see how I've kept some elements of where I see the shape, where I see the shapes of things. Probably the most important thing are the shapes of the masses against the obviously transition from one thing to another. So I start to describe the bridge in the most abstract and simple ways at the start. And this particular bridge had the wonderful, they all have the different sweeps in the cables and different shapes that they make, but to a large degree, I really enjoy the shapes that they make as an abstract shape. And you don't see it quite as much in a building. Buildings tend to be more rectangular and simple, but the bridges offer kind of sweeps and a sense of motion that you don't have in other things that you look at. And so it's quite a lot of work from this in the second sitting, and then from this stage done outside, the painting then comes into the studio, and then probably quite a few hours working on the studio in this to complete the painting. And to complete the painting, I'm bringing and introducing the light that I saw when I first went there. When I first got there, first thing, I saw those lights illuminated along the park in Roosevelt Island. And I saw the lights on the Queensboro Bridge illuminated along the bottom of it. And then I understood also in the beginning of the painting that where I saw the color, how much warmer the sky was on the left to the sky on the right, and how much green and yellow and violet and other colors that were there. These are the colors that you get from using flat paint. When you're using oil paint, probably you can get some of the same effects with acrylics, but I don't think so. I think oil paints really do lend themselves to a sense of transparency. And even when you're painting things very simply like this, you're actually painting something flat that absorbs slightly into the surface, and it gets a little bit matted. And just from a technical point of view for oil painting, that's called, the term is used, fat over lean, which means that you underpainting that you paint is lean, meaning it has very little solvent in it, but it uses solvent. And then your surface painting that you do has more oil in it, and it's more actual pieces of oil paint that are plopped in on top of the lean underneath. This keeps the paint from cracking. It keeps it from falling off, essentially. So Pat, how are we doing for time? It's almost 7, so should we take a break?
Yes, I think this would be a good time to take a break. If this is a good stopping point. Do you want to just take 10 minutes?
That would be fine. Yep.
So we'll come back at 7 after?
7 after 7, that'd be great. Yep.
Is that good?
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll
Great.
pause the recording then.
Okay. I'm turning.
a project. And how, sometimes you can paint because you're painting, but sometimes there's the project to do. And so I was just making that connection, and you don't need
So-
to respond to that.
So what was the play?
Pictures from Home.
Hmm.
It was about a photographer who had a project that he was doing. He was a professor at a university, and so he was a professor of photography. And so he's going through the old family photos and movies and making a project out of it. And it was, the father and son discussion. But it was just interesting that I've just heard this artistic phrase, the project, and you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of interesting. It is true. I mean, one could study art and know that every artist always did projects. But sometimes things are individual paintings, individual ideas. And then sometimes you develop an idea for a whole show or a whole idea that you do a presentation about some particular idea, and you develop within the scope of that idea rather than within the scope of all of the work that you've always done. And I think that that's the interesting thing here in this particular thing is I sometimes choose subjects but they're more based on region and location, just working in a particular place than they are about anything else. This is a very specific thing about dawn, that concept. I've never really experimented with the idea of doing something about dawn. This idea that, and of course, dawn and dusk are the two times of day that evoke a lot of feelings or thoughts or ideas based on dawn or dusk. I don't know how many of you have spent any time walking at night or getting up very early. I bet many of you get up early and take a walk in the morning. It's a very different time of day than as things get busy, and it's a very quiet and kind of a thoughtful time before the sun comes up. But there's also a kind of what I would call a romantic kind of light, that period of light for both dawn and dusk, right when you can start seeing color for about an hour, both for dawn and dusk, you can start seeing color, but the sun's not up yet. And so you see all this color bathed in this kind of what you would call subdued light, but it's a very specific light. It's a very, that's what I found in working at this time of day. And I was astounded at how quickly things changed, how quickly I'd look at the sky and then 15 minutes later it would go from blue to purple, or go from purple to green, and in terms of comparison. And that, of course, for me is exciting as a painter, as an artist, and doing the type of painting that I do. So I hope everybody's back, and I'll continue. So here you see the finished painting of the Queensboro Bridge, and you can really get a feeling for the sense. And I know, because I've spent a lot of time at Rockaway Beach, I know that sun is just now coming up over the Atlantic Ocean to the left, over at Rockaway Beach. And of course, it's not at Rockaway Beach; it's way off from there. But that idea that whole beach is being illuminated, and all of Queens and all of Manhattan. So that idea that you're looking at something right before, so much becomes about all of these lights that are man-made lights. A lot of my inspiration for this came because I drove a lot along the East River in the early morning, and I would see a whole variety of types of experiences going on. You see the little bit of a tugboat going up the river there, and also the distant part of Roosevelt Island, and then the distant parts of Brooklyn. But more than anything, you see the water reflecting, and you see breeze, you see like actual wind on the water. And then where there's no wind on the water, it becomes like glass, and it reflects literally what's above it. what it's reflecting. So you see the buildings being reflected there and the still water, whereas the breeze picks up and creates a flat plane. And we're looking here at the new science development on the Roosevelt Island that's there, and this whole new whole science area. And the crumbling FDR. It's really kind of sad. You look at the FDR, I don't know if they're going to rebuild the whole thing, but it is slowly kind of crumbling away. And so back further south again, I'm looking at this right from that idea of twin bridges, and that idea of the scope of how the bridges are narrow in Brooklyn. And they really do go right into the center of Brooklyn. They go kind of zipping down there. And then you have Brooklyn downtown almost back behind them. And then they widen out to the Twin Bridges neighborhood behind where this photograph is taken from. And you really see the difference between the right-hand Brooklyn Bridge and the left-hand Manhattan Bridge. And you can kind of see the stylistic difference of how one used all metal and how one used predominantly stone. And the cables were probably very similar for both bridges, and just more modernized perhaps for the Manhattan Bridge. But the production of the cables were pretty much the same. And that idea of a suspension bridge, I'm not a bridge historian, but that idea of a suspension bridge, you imagine the amount of weight that's there in the middle of the span, and how that holds it, how that one particular piece of cable goes all the way back through there, and then folds it in place, that middle span, and that idea of the span in both cases, to have that, be able to have that long span that you can have from this engineering of these bridges. So it's a beautiful thing at a distance. In my particular case, I developed this into the idea of painting both of their bridges. So this was probably my first, this is a large painting, and it was my first strike out when I went out and painted for several hours. This is pretty much what I came up with for that time outside. And I may have gone back for a second. I'm trying to remember on this particular painting, but this was meant to be really about the water and about the sensation of the water that's not too rough, fairly calm, but then begins to reflect some of the sky and some of the sense of the choppy water in the foreground and the things moving back in space. And then that big sky that I always call it kind of a big sky, and a little bit of sun, which in this painting did pop up, and it popped up, and I put it right in there as a little note of orange to be kind of like the sky. And then when I finished the painting in the studio, this is what the final painting looked like. Using that high clouds, the clouds way up, so you get the sensation of the calmness of the water, reflecting a little bit the colors and the lights of Brooklyn, but then the feeling of the two different bridges sort of speaking to us in a sense, these two kind of dynamic different styles of bridges, and then the lights, of course, are along the water. But I think that this painting was really meant to be really kind of a tribute to Brooklyn in a sense, because it's right in the middle. And then the sense of stillness and peacefulness when you have the sky very, very high up, where the clouds are really high up in the air, and then as they're so high in the air, they kind of move very slowly. And I remember that day really specifically, that the clouds were just slowly moving. And then when the sun came up, all those orange clouds appeared, because the sun, they even appeared before the sun popped up, because they were so much higher. The sun was hitting them before the sun was hitting us. But I really enjoyed, I remember putting playing with all these lights, these little spots of the lights, and the idea of literally painting actual lights, that you're not painting light like an impressionist would paint light, like illuminating a bush or a tree or something, but instead you're actually painting the actual light itself. And I had to use that, when we looked at my palette, I had to use that very cool yellow that I use with white, only very little bit of that, just to make the color be pretty close to what it was. So here's a good image to show you the span underneath, pretty much underneath the Manhattan Bridge, looking in the direction northeast, looking up towards the Brooklyn Power Plant, and then looking down at the Manhattan Bridge. And you can kind of get an idea of the two different styles of the bridges. But you can also get an idea of the vastness in the sense of that feeling that you get when you're underneath this big bridge. So this became another painting. This became probably my favorite painting. And this is how I would have painted it the first time when I was outside painting it from the north side, looking south at Brooklyn, and painting only the darks and the shapes and as quickly as possible to get a feeling of where the masses were, and without any definition too much of the lights or of the reflections or the water. It's really, this painting was really about the bridge itself and where I was going to have it located. And then this is the final painting, I think, and I'm pretty sure that's the final. There's the final painting there. And so the different stages, you can kind of see, this is sort of the middle period of the painting. This is initially first started and seeing the shapes of those buildings, and then starting to see where I'm seeing the lights put in, and then eventually finished with the sense of the water, the reflection of the water, and the sense of the movement of the water. And every time a ship went by or something, you get a whole new series of waves, which I would try to paint in. And but basically the idea, the sensation. I jump back to this because I want you to kind of get this idea of the water, of how important water is in these paintings. And obviously it's the most important element, but it's about the elements, the different elements, the sky and the water being the most important. And then the human thing that we have is everything that we made, the bridges, the buildings, the sense of that. And you can kind of get that feeling here that everything is man-made, all these things, but that the beauty, in a sense, is just the water itself, which was there forever, and as long as it was in our minds forever. And then the sky and the water, but that, you know, that Roosevelt Bridge was not, the Roosevelt Island was not a man-made island, though a lot of Manhattan is man-made. A lot of things are filled in, and a lot of the forward part and the coastal part of Manhattan has changed a lot and altered some. But you get an idea from this of that juxtaposition, and how I begin that painting was just a simple light brown canvas, and then start to paint. And you can kind of see, here I am going backwards with the stage that the painting was when I got to this point. And I think that if you look here, this is one of the great inventions of Impressionist painting and painting outdoors is this tube paint. So when they invented tube paint, this idea, that was when the painters were able to go outside. Before that, they would have to make their paints each time they worked in the workshops and in the studios. They would make the paint each day. But when they came up with an idea of how to put it into tubes, suddenly the artists were freed up to go and travel wherever they went with the paints, and also to go outside, and were able to set up the paints outside and work with this idea of working outdoors. So many of the times I'm out there, it's wonderful because I really get to enjoy and see the things that go on, and that's kind of where I take a break in my head, that I'm able to just enjoy the experience, and that's really pretty nice for me. So often the ships would go by, and I find that these industrial things are really beautiful. They're equally beautiful to other things in nature. I mean, to me, looking at this water and looking at these things go by is equal to somebody watching a horse run through the Grand Canyon or something like that. I mean, to me, it's like as beautiful as that. And I think that the sense of this river, the East River, of course, the amazing history of both rivers, the Hudson River and the East River, in terms of transportation. If you imagine the ships the sailboats that went up, and when New York Harbor was the most prominent and important harbor in all of the East Coast and all of the United States, and the ships that went in and out of here. But now these barges go up to Albany. These are large barges that go right up there. This is transporting a crane for construction, but you'll find pretty much everything going up. And I really, when I went to paint this was a very small painting of the Brooklyn Power Plant with the sky, and so in this particular case, I really enjoyed catching the sky with one of those, what I call a big sky, meaning that the clouds were way in the distance, and then the small clouds were way up high, but they moved very slowly. And then as the sun came up, it was behind the clouds, and the color was just so beautiful to me. I mean, just watching the orange and the yellow against the green and the purples, and just I really enjoyed against the band of kind of brown of the land and the buildings and the Brooklyn Power Plant. But I remember the motion of the water, and when you think about, when you look at this, you get an idea of the horizontality of the motion of the water, the waves kind of going back and forth. And so then I use that in my paint as I apply the paint and make the waves a little bigger closer up and a little less big further away, so that you get this feeling of transition from front to back. And then the mixture of that sky color being the reflection, and then the front of the wave being a dark green, which is the color of the water. So if you look in the most simple way here, you can kind of see that the color of you don't really see as much of the green in the front of the wave just because of the color of the particular photograph. But when you're out there in nature, and by the way, you all know this, when you're outside, you see a lot more. Your eyes see a great deal more, even though a camera can capture things, it doesn't capture anywhere near the amount of color that you can actually see with your own eyes. And the color that you see, to a certain degree, to a large degree, it's real. To a certain degree, as a painter and as an artist, you start to know how your color is adapted from the actual colors that you have. You start knowing that you use in cools and warms, that you're seeing a type of a color that would transcribe in the use of paint. So sometimes I think of painting in an interesting way. I think of it like a skin, like this is actually a surface, like it's a surface of paint that I paint on there. And a lot of artists do talk about the surface of an oil painting, and how artists are able to try to get a sense of the surface, because the placement in the drawing is important, of course, and getting a sense of where things are, the volume of things is important, but getting a type of a surface also in terms of the action of the painting, and the idea that you would see the actual action and the done. So some of the times when I would do a painting like that painting, I'd go back to my car with it. And in this case, it just happened to be when I got back to the car that the kids were all just arriving for school. So about half an hour before this, or 20 minutes, I'd set up just to, from my memory, finish lots of aspects of the painting. So I kept working on the painting from my memory. So I'm just using my memory and what I recall. And I still have my wet paint on the palette. So I'm kind of wanting to use up the paint that I have on my palette. And so wanting to use up that paint, I basically decided I'm just going to keep painting here. And then the kids arrived. And then this wonderful audience of very curious children arrived, and they were adorable. I mean, they were just curious, and of course I couldn't quite understand what they were asking me because they had masks on, but they did say how the basic questions you get when you're out painting: how long does that take you? Are you going to sell it? You know, these are the basic two questions, and then sometimes more questions, and sometimes you actually get an artist or somebody who really knows something, and they'll ask a very pointed question about, oh, why did you choose that location? And that basically from leaving from that location here. So I mean, basically when I did that painting, I went north in Manhattan. So I went north, and that little island you see on the right, you see, of course, you see the red X. To the right of the red X is Randall's Island, which is our big island that we have with a lot of sports. Also a couple of gas plants there that store gasoline, that store liquid gas. But predominantly it's an island that's known for its sports and its events, because I know I've been out there for concerts and things like that. But this is where my studio is, not that far from where the Red X is. And as you see, the bridges that cross over to Randall's Island, you have at the very top of the screen, on the top right, you see two bridges. The top bridge that goes to Randall's Island is actually the span that goes over to the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge. And the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge runs over Randall's Island over to Queens. And then the other bridge that's going to Queens from Randall's is actually the railroad bridge. So you have two bridges from there, railroad and the car bridge. But at the top going to Manhattan is the span. It's a small span that goes into Manhattan, and above that is the Willis Avenue Bridge. And so you get an idea here on the map where I then went to. So not that far from my studio is the East River, northern Manhattan. And I went several times to that location to paint up along the water there. So that was a little bit scarier for me, going out at 5 in.the morning and there was just nobody around. But simply, I just paid attention to where I was and who was around me, and I didn't have a problem. And particularly enjoyed, really, like when I was downtown, there were more people around at 5 or 6 in the morning, but up here there was nobody around. So you really got a little sense looking at Randall's Island of real nature, and I really couldn't help but think of the Barbizon School, or that school of French painting. But what I particularly loved is what would happen with the clouds as the sun came up. This sort of abstraction that occurred with a little bit of illuminating light behind the clouds. These wispy, very, very, very high clouds that were really at a far distance away. And then, of course, how the breezes caught the water, and then how the foreground of the water was very flat. And then you go back to see a reflected breeze. And the breeze actually reflects the color of the sky more so than the actual flat water, which reflects the sense of the land, the buildings, and the sky, also the warmer sky. Everything foreground of this reflects what's above you. As it goes further away, it reflects things that are further away. And then always one of the beautiful things of being anywhere in nature is seeing some of the stunning things that happen with clouds, with atmosphere, and with changes. And sometimes I'll include them in my paintings, but usually not. I just like enjoying the experience of seeing how the illuminated lights in the distant shore right before they're turned off. And then this is the painting I created there that day. And using the colors, the sense of the water, sense of the sky, the type of clouds that were there that I saw. Often I would paint a cloud. I mean, I certainly saw these clouds here, these ones here, the ones here in the distance actually moved, and those clouds moved and further away to the right. And I actually painted them as they got further up and got a little bit darker, and the sun got a little bit further up and illuminated the sky a little bit more. But this is about 2 hours of painting, where I'm painting in the dark and not painting the lights in the dark, but only really looking at the color of the illumination of the sky and the sense of the sky, the darkened light of the sky, and always these brilliant little clouds like up here that before the sun comes up are bright orange and bright red. I mean, they're really, the sense of color in these is something I really enjoy. And kind of like that. Same thing happened with looking at the span from the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge. I think this is the only one really I have where you're actually seeing the Bronx, and you're looking up at the Bronx. You're looking up the East River into the Bronx, and you're seeing that span that goes over to Roosevelt Island, excuse me, over to Randall's Island on the right. This is a kind of a romantic painting because I just love the wispiness of the orange and the rose color hitting the clouds against the green of that span. And so color plays to a large degree, plays a big role in the things that I paint. I mean, I love to see the color. I love the idea of it. I love the romantic idea of painting something in the early morning, painting something with changing light. But I particularly enjoy the color, seeing the color that's there, the literal color of the clouds, that they would become purple, or that the sky would be lighter or darker. And so a lot of the work that I do has to do with that juxtaposition, the juxtaposition of land to sea, the juxtaposition of land to the river, I should say. And of course, in my seascapes, I really love that idea of the land to the ocean. And a lot of the paintings that I've done have to do with the intersection of land and ocean, sky, trees and water. It's sort of like you put a square and divided a canvas up into a square. You could say the top left is going to be sky, the top right will be distant sky, the bottom left will be the land, and the bottom right will be the water. I mean, this idea of a horizon moving across can be the thing that leads your eye across as your eye moves through and around things. So I couldn't help but think that if I'm going to paint Dawn, I have to paint a little bit about the city. So I did find locations where I could park the car for a little bit longer time. In this case, Spring Street. I'm painting Spring Street in Soho. And that was really interesting to paint right in the middle of the street with having everything happen right in the early morning when the city comes awake. And so if I started in the dark, which I did in this painting, really literally almost pitch black, I still had quite a bit of light around me from the city. And so I started working very fast, finding a location, but within minutes, it got really busy. And so all of a sudden, I'm there painting that, and 2 minutes later, a truck pulls up, 2 trucks pull up, and these guys unload all these boxes right into my way. But you have to kind of go along with the flow. And I didn't want to move. So I just continued working, and within 20 minutes or half an hour, they got the boxes inside. I was able to kind of go back and see, but what I would just do is move to another part of the painting. So I basically would paint the top part of the painting, the illumination of the windows against the sky, the sense of the background lights. These are the things that I look to continue working on the painting. And this is the finished painting. And I remember a little kid going to school is on the left. So just a little bit of a figurative sense, but I really enjoy the old-fashioned lit poles for the metro, I call the metro the subway, and then the corner of the building, very cityscape like, very different from the other ones that were the bridges, but the sense this buildings become like the mass of the bridges, and that sensation of light is just very similar because you have that dark mass of the street, and this dark mass of the streets like the dark mass of a building, the dark mass of a bridge. It's all those dark, large areas contrasted against the light areas that are man-made and illuminated, like the doorway, and the little bit of color in the top of the doorway, and the idea of the subway. I got a feeling, I guess, I don't know, I hope some of you have seen the Edward Hopper show, but of course I'm a big fan of Edward Hopper, and he really painted New York City, and he didn't paint as many nocturnes or dark morning or evening. He did some. He particularly liked the light hitting illuminating brick buildings. That was his favorite thing. I really liked in this painting the sense of the going back in space, straight back in the street with the distant car, just moving away from you, crossing the intersection. And another location I found was wonderful Italian bakery at this location. It's like Delancey and trying to remember the cross street, but what we recall kind of the Lower East Side and just a little bit north of that. And just the beauty of that time of day in the city that everybody's still asleep or just barely starting to start moving. But it was I would set up and just kind of block in the very simple shapes that I saw. And then this wonderful guy walked by, and I luckily did have my camera with me then. So I quickly snapped his picture, and that developed into the painting of that location. And these wonderful clouds that were those high clouds. They looked like huge kind of spaceships almost that were moving across the sky very slowly. But the sense of the pavement of everything moving back creates these strong diagonals. And those strong diagonals, to a certain degree, were in the bridges too. But that idea that of a man-made created idea into a painting. Of course, we're all nostalgic for old New York. I mean, I'm very nostalgic. I love old New York architecture, and I love looking at it. And but I equally love modern architecture too. I mean, not equally. I think I like older architecture better. But I love to see the age that things have taken on, and the patina that they get on them, and then the sense of how they reflect light, and the sense. I mean, I really enjoyed painting this part of the painting. I mean, if you look at it, you can kind of see that building going back as a church in the distance that sticks out a little bit, and then that kind of abstract sense of that illuminated doorway there that kind of goes into there, and this man with his hands behind his back because he's walking and thinking. So he's like a poet. He's like a writer who's walking along, imagining things as he sees them go by, and then a delivery van delivering. So there's a narrative sense to these, I think, that you don't get quite as much as you do in the paintings of the bridges and the water, because the water doesn't really introduce you to the sidewalk and the pavement and the road that can offer more of America. That's at that location, painting that particular painting. And this is what it looks like half an hour after suddenly the sun comes up, and boom, everything gets bathed in that light. And that's when you stop. It's a little bit like Dracula having to stop working and get back into his tomb. I continued painting, and also near the United Nations. This is Dag Hammarskjöld Park, and this park is a wonderful park that was developed there for that whole neighborhood of Turtle Bay. And so I found that I loved looking at this all the time, this wonderful monument, in a sense, to the world, this piece of sculpture. And I liked the piece of sculpture and monument, thinking that I should paint it, and that idea of seeing it, that through the sky, just became something. And then lo and behold, they had a market there. And so I decided I would paint the market and get out there and paint when the market was going on. And so this is what I did outdoors while the market was actually active. And I just sort of stood there with my headphones on, so I didn't have to talk to too many people, because there were actually many more people there that particular day. But I enjoyed the abstraction, in a sense, of the tents going back for the market, and the colors of the fruits and vegetables, which you'll see. And then there's idea of the light coming through the world, and it's in fact what it's doing there, as well as the trees that go back. And this wonderful United Nations when an engine guard came by, and we talked for a little bit, and then this is that particular finished painting. And I used as I finished the painting in the studio, I did use my photographs to paint the parts that you see here on the left, and also to get the dog on the right, because that figure actually comes from this photograph here. And then I took her dog from another photo and just put her in the painting in the studio to animate it, in a sense, to get another dimension of that early morning New York classic experience of watching everybody clean up after their dogs. but also that idea of people going, like the man in the middle here, who's packing up all the vegetables and emptying out all the boxes. The sense of activity there with that idea of this globe and the light hitting the church. The light comes up on the other side of the UN. It illuminates the modern buildings on the left, and you can see the church there on the left catching the light, while the pavement in the foreground is also catching the light. And I think it had just rained, I think, so the pavement was kind of wet. So this is a show that I had at the National Arts Club, and the Dawn Show, and you can kind of see its presentation. It's a small gallery, and this is a sneak peek at the actual way that the residents of the National Arts Club walk back to their apartments. They walk underneath the famous Tilden home and back to the back building on 19th Street. But the main building here, which is where its galleries are, this is the smallest gallery, the project room. And so this was the project. This was the project to develop a series of paintings for this one location, and knowing very well that it didn't have a lot of space, but it doesn't really matter how much space you have. I have often painted small, and I've never ever painted really large like so many artists do. So it wasn't that difficult or uncomfortable for me to do small paintings. I kind of like doing small paintings. But having them as a cohesive idea was a wonderful experience. I really appreciated and enjoyed the experience of people who appreciated the pictures and the idea about the pictures. Now everybody is New York's a very popular subject matter. So the idea of painting the bridges in New York has appeal for everybody. But I think that putting them into the context of a time of day here was probably the most successful thing about the show. And I have to take a little thing. It's a dangerous thing doing art. I said how undangerous it was, but I just had to humor you all with this setup I did 35 or 40, maybe 50 years ago when I was painting in Maryland. And I came by this rock and I just thought this would be the funniest thing to imagine. As much as I adore landscape painting and painting outdoors, I always do wonder what it would be like if suddenly there was a tornado or something happened that was dramatic, because sometimes you're in the woods all by yourself and there's nobody there to help you, and it's one of the dramatic elements of stuff. But I did have a little bit of fun for 20 minutes setting this up to imagine what it'd be like if a boulder fell on us. And it's a wonderful way to kind of come to an end of an experience in a humorous way, because I did this as funny, like almost like a filmmaking or photographic thing. But this is, of course, I can't remember which road this was in Maryland, but one of the ones I used to paint when I was in college. Well, I think I've come to an end here.
Wow.
Mm.
Is
And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody or any questions anybody might have.
You know, Dave and Teresa used to live and work on Governor's Island, right? They're on mute, but didn't you guys used to live on Governor's Island?
Yes,
Yeah,
we did.
we lived on Governor's Island. We used to look at those bridges and love them, but what I
Hi,
found.
Dave. Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Hi, Robert.
How are you?
I certainly enjoyed you tonight. That's a wonderful presentation for us.
I can't tell you how much I've missed this. My brother was an artist in New York City and painted all those streets, painted a bunch of the bridges, etc. Taught at Parsons, and we'd get together regularly and he'd talk about his paintings and so on. And it just was wonderful. He's passed away a year or so ago, and I miss it, but it's wonderful hearing you. It's like having Bill back. You were at Parsons. Did you happen to know William Klutz while you were there?
Bill, who?
Bill Klutz, C-L-U-T-Z?
Yes, K-U-T-S, C?
C-L-U-T-Z.
Yes, I know that. Yeah, absolutely.
He taught drawing and painting at Parsons for over 20 years, I guess.
David's
Well,
brother.
I went to graduate school at Parsons. I graduated in 1981.
Well, that's when Bill was there.
And that's when I know that name from. He taught in the undergraduate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he probably often came into our studio. We had our studio on Fifth Avenue, right at 14th Street or 13th Street,
Yeah.
in one of the big Parsons buildings there. And tell me how to, his name, spell his last name again?
It's CLUTZ.
They don't pronounce it that way.
Yeah, look it up.
We pronounce it Klutz.
Mhm.
When we grew up in southern Pennsylvania, it was Klutz and nobody could do it. So most people came out Klutz, and we decided in Binghamton that it was much better to be Klutz for our children. So, but Bill, God bless him, it was always Bill Klutz, William Klutz. He didn't pull any punches. And in
I
New York
definitely
City,
remember him. Yeah.
didn't bother him. Yeah.
And his things you can see on the internet now, I'm sure,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, everything, all the paintings that he's got in the various museums and stuff. Yeah, but yeah.
I hate to ask you to spell it for me one more time.
I'll give it to you. Don't worry.
Okay, Robin, that'd be great.
CLUTZ.
Yep.
Like Klutz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like Klutz.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I do definitely remember his work.
So Martha, what do you have going on behind you?
Okay, let's all see what Martha's doing.
Yeah, she's finding the mute button. Too bad they don't let you unmute people on Zoom.
Right. So that could be problematic if you did that.
Yeah, I know.
I can ask her to unmute so that she can click on it.
She's looking for the mute button.
Yeah.
There she goes. What do you got behind you, Martha? You're unmuted.
What did you ask me?
What's behind you?
It's my refrigerator with with magnet
Magnet art.
photos for my kids.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And
I do have all kinds of artwork all over the place.
Roz, what's behind you?
Well, I have behind me,
Oh,
suppose
Roz.
I can do this, you can kind of see, you can see the large oil painting I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
And it's the subject is two figures. So I've done a whole series of what I call two figures in the 1980s or 90s, 80s or 90s is when I painted, when I had my first studio in Gramercy Park, and I painted a lot of cityscapes with cars, older cars. And now I've taken my videos and my photographs from that time, particularly videos, and then I'm taking them and selecting out of them the figures that are in them and pairing them up so that I have two figures that are juxtaposed, walking across each other, and they're kind of different styles, different types of people, and in a way, and I hope to reflect the beautiful nature of our city, which is so multicultural and spirited. And so I really like this idea of these two people passing each other with their shopping bags. And so I've done quite a few with their different outfits on, and they're all pretty much dated from the late 80s and the 90s, the people. And so I'm on my fourth large one that I'm doing right now. So. Well, I'm so glad. If anybody have any other thoughts or questions?
Oh, I was wondering if you ever painted the Verrazzano Bridge. There's a couple of places from Staten Island where you can park and see the bridge very well to paint. I don't know if you've ever been on that side.
Well, I've been to Staten Island many times. I love Staten Island. But I haven't gone to paint that. It was very paintable because it's so huge.
Yeah.
And it's so dramatic. I mean, it's the biggest bridge, really.
There's a little park just before the fort near Cliff Street. And if you go up to the top of the road in the park, you're like practically underneath the bridge. So that's a really cool place. And then South Beach has a huge boardwalk and bathrooms. I always look for bathrooms when I'm going to go paint somewhere. Make sure there's somewhere to sit and then a bathroom.
But one thing I love about Staten Island, it's really like the biggest mistake you can make is make the wrong turn when you're driving anywhere on the Brooklyn side. And then you end up going to Staten Island and you say, oh, there goes another $25. You know, it's like,
I
did
thought you
ever-
were going to talk about the, what was it? They used to have like tracks for the farm animals. And
Oh,
they
really?
built the streets where the tracks were. So if there was like a cow track or something, that became a street eventually. So the streets are all like this.
Mm. Wow.
Scott, you had a question?
A comment, Robert, I really liked your paintings and also how you described the process of going through them, every aspect of it. I think you covered very well, and it's a lot of technical things involved. I appreciate that more now. Just the type of paint and the lighting of the day and the angles. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Scott. Yeah, I think there's a lot that that goes into people think of painting like in a literal sense, and it's not a normal, it's pretty normal to think, well, there's a picture of something. But the process, I mean, I'm a real exponent for oil paint. I just would never do anything different than oil paint, just because it's to me, the most lifelike paint that you can use. And the most immediate, because when you make a painting, you actually see the actual painting. You don't have to frame it with glass, so that immediacy of the actual work is there. That's why we see thousands of people pushing each other out of the way to look at a Van Gogh or whatever, because they really get to see you can feel Vincent's hand putting that brushstroke right there. And
Hey, Rob, I'm sorry. Could you stop the screen share? Because Dave's going to try to show us something and it's going to be really little.
Yeah, I just wanted to show you, Bob. This is Bill's.
yeah, now I very much
the
now
crossings.
now I very much remember his stuff. Yep.
Yeah, it just did. That was kind of his thing.
You know, I do remember his cityscapes with the figures. Yeah. And what was that book from? A show he had in a gallery?
Yeah, this was actually one that I stole off the floor of his studio. He used to do these oil on paper sketches. And
Oh, that's
they'd be
actually
on the
that's
floor of
actually a
his
painting.
studio, and I'd grab them.
Well, I think he had a gallery too. Pretty sure.
Yeah, he had.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. He wound
Either
up. Let's see.
was he with William Shokoff?
No. Katerina Rich Perlow was his glass gallery.
Perlow, yeah.
Yeah, they're on Madison Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
But he'd been with I got a catalog there. It's got all his various galleries, but those were his things.
That's great.
He did. He did some in acrylics, but he, like you, much preferred the
Oils.
the oils.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, though, that he really liked was pastels.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he had one gallery that said, "I don't want to see your oil paintings. Just give me pastels. The pastels really sell."
Mm-hmm.
Of course, those are all under glass, and you lose something when it's under glass because of the reflection and so on.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I love pastels, that's the thing I don't like about them. But you have to put glass on them, and then they and the reason why the galleries want them, frankly, is because they're cheaper. You know, their work's on paper.
Yeah.
And so a big oil painting is more valuable, quote unquote. That formula is kind of a little bit going away now. That idea that a big oil painting is more valuable than a work on paper, but that's a thing that I think that people don't like about pastels.
Yeah.
But they're both wonderful
Have you
mediums.
lived in New York City?
Gee, probably well, I came here twice. So first time I came here was to go to graduate school, so for 4 years. Then I came back and I've been here now for 40 years.
Oh, that's a long time. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there's one comment in the chat from Meredith. Will you paint the new Como Bridge? Great lighting from Terrytown.
You know, I love that. I've walked across the bridge, and yeah, I love the view of it from both angles, both from the Terrytown side and from the New Jersey side. And I took a lot of photographs, and I think one of the harder things is you have to get a parking space to park your car there to be able to be at the foot of the bridge. But yes, that would certainly be one to paint.
Any
Well,
other?
I'm so embarrassed that I left this horrible image so long of me on the street there. You know, I probably should have, let's leave that one. That's a little more positive.
That's a much better one. Yeah.
I like all the blue. You can see the same blue in all the paintings. Which,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fabulous.
yeah. Well, the sky, you know, the sky has a variety of blues. There's like 3 colors in the oil paint. So, and the range is from green to violet. That's the best way to describe it. So if you get a certain time of day, you'll get a lot more green in the sky, and certain time of day you get a lot more violet in the sky. And of course the skies could change, and there's a lot of artistic license taken in these paintings, in that I make things a little darker than they really are, or a little lighter than they really are, particularly when they're against each other. So the juxtaposition of dark to light, those are the things that excite people's eyes when they're looking at something. You know, they like to see transition, they like to see exaggeration, they like to see, but my things are not hugely expressive. I mean, I'm not an abstract painter or abstract expressionist, or but I certainly look to see the abstract elements in anything that I see. You know, the basic abstract elements, which are beautiful. But I'll never understand where Ellsworth Kelly gets all the motion that he gets, because Ellsworth Kelly, I'll never forget, like 30 years ago, having a friend collecting art, and then she said, well, look at that Ellsworth Kelly, it's so simple, it just has the line sweeping from one corner to the other in an angle. It's just so simple, so beautifully stated. And I look at it and I'm absolutely bored by it.
Isn't it the truth?
Yeah, but Ellsworth Kelly made a great successful career, and you know, some of his things are really quite beautiful.
Well, thank you
Well, thank
very much for this presentation.
My pleasure. I hope we're all learning more, right? So let's all keep learning.
Absolutely. I hope you can come back again and look more on some of your street paintings. I see one here in the gallery. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Great.
Very
Well,
nice. Very nice.
thank-
Thank you so much.
Really a pleasure
Thank
having
you.
all of you
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and
Thanks so much.
great meeting all of you
Thank
visually.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Nice meeting you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you both.